In intelligence circles and strategic planning rooms across Washington and London, a significant shift is being observed this evening regarding Beijing's long-term ambitions. For years, the year 2027 has been widely cited as the potential timeframe for a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, a scenario President Xi Jinping has consistently threatened. However, a critical impediment has emerged, effectively halting China's military preparations before they could fully commence. This unexpected development is attributed to a nation thousands of miles distant, Ukraine. Its ongoing conflict has, remarkably, reshaped the calculus for a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan, surprising even U.S. strategists with its profound impact on President Xi's agenda. Ukraine's actions do not directly involve Taiwan, yet they are reportedly a source of considerable frustration for President Xi. China's strategic timelines are now delayed, a direct consequence of Ukraine's sustained defense against Russia. Over more than 4 years of conflict, Ukraine has fundamentally challenged China's assumptions about a Taiwan invasion, playing a substantial role in making any immediate invasion or annexation of Taiwan by China appear unfeasible. This may sound like a significant assertion. This perspective gains clarity upon recognizing that the conflict in Ukraine has introduced novel tactics and methods of warfare, which nations across Southeast Asia, particularly Taiwan, have been closely observing and are now in the process of adopting. Ukraine has effectively established a strategic blueprint for how a smaller nation can mount a robust defense against a military force that appears numerically superior. This blueprint is not exclusive to Ukraine. It is applicable to any nation choosing to implement it. For Taiwan specifically, this strategy could potentially neutralize China's invasion capabilities entirely. The events of the past 4 years have reportedly taken President Xi completely by surprise, with every prior assumption regarding a Taiwan invasion now rendered obsolete. Before examining these developments, let us first review China's original strategic framework. Since assuming power, President Xi has directed substantial resources towards transforming China into one of the world's most formidable military powers. For an extended period, China's military expenditure has seen substantial growth, with President Xi showing no indication of curtailing this investment. In the 3 years leading up to 2026, China's annual defense budget increased by 7.2% each year, with an additional 7% increase projected for 2026. This sustained, high-percentage growth in defense spending is unusual for a nation already possessing such a formidable military, suggesting an accelerated timeline for strategic objectives rather than a gradual modernization typical of other rising powers. It indicates a clear intent to achieve overwhelming superiority quickly. This significant investment was intended to cultivate a military force deemed more than capable of taking Taiwan. According to Global Firepower, China has developed the world's third strongest military. The Chinese Navy is the world's largest by sheer number of assets, and the second largest after the United States in terms of tonnage. China possesses both aircraft and helicopter carriers. Its air force comprises over 3,500 aircraft, including nearly 1,500 fighter jets. By most assessments, China has transitioned from its historical designation as the sick man of Asia to become the region's most dominant military force, at least in theoretical terms. This extensive force buildup was intended to be central to China's plans for Taiwan. The proposed strategy was straightforward and conventional, based on President Xi's understanding of modern military tactics. First, a blockade, followed by attrition. Recent years have indicated China's intention to utilize its substantial navy to establish a blockade around Taiwan, designed to incapacitate the Taiwanese military. Such a blockade would prevent both exports from leaving and imports from entering Taiwan, a strategy considered feasible. Precedents can be observed in the actions of both Iran and the United States within the Strait of Hormuz. The Justice Mission 2025 exercise, conducted by China between December 29th and December 30th, illustrates this intent. This military drill encompassed areas surrounding Taiwan, involving Chinese vessels and aircraft traversing the East China Sea, the Philippine Sea, and extending into the Taiwan Strait. During these war games, China simulated a blockade of Taiwan, which it intends to implement as a precursor to an amphibious invasion and as a component of its attrition strategy. Regarding attrition, the secondary objective of China's massive military buildup was to overwhelm Taiwan purely through superior resources. This approach has been, and continues to be, Russia's strategy in Ukraine. Indeed, it is a strategy Russia has employed since the Soviet era and even earlier, simply possessing more of everything, more soldiers, tanks, ships, planes, and equipment. The expectation is that the adversary will eventually collapse, as traditional warfare is resource-intensive, and a smaller nation invariably possesses fewer resources than a larger one. This constituted China's plan for Taiwan: blockade, invade, and attrit. China's challenge, and Taiwan's potential advantage, lies in the point previously discussed. This strategy is effective only when the opponent engages in the same type of warfare. This is not the approach Ukraine has adopted against Russia, and it means China's assumptions regarding a Taiwan invasion, both naval and ground-based, are now largely invalid. Ukraine has demonstrated that modern warfare strategies enable a smaller nation to mount a formidable defense against an invading force. This dynamic is currently observable in Ukraine. While it remains a war of attrition, it is no longer solely about the sheer volume of resources. Instead, it focuses on developing the most cost-effective methods for neutralizing enemy assets on the battlefield. This leads us to a key element: drones. Ukraine possesses them, Taiwan seeks them, and China reportedly views them with apprehension. China's intended invasion of Taiwan was never projected as a simple undertaking, regardless of the financial, human, and material resources President Xi might commit. Significant obstacles remained. The Taiwan Strait experiences very rough seas for substantial portions of the year, conditions severe enough to necessitate pauses in any invasion attempt. There are also limited viable landing beaches accessible via the strait, all of which would be heavily fortified with Taiwanese defenses. Monsoons, typhoons, mountainous terrain, and a formidable defensive force would confront any Chinese soldiers participating in such an invasion. Original plans for invading Taiwan still anticipated massive casualties for China, potentially numbering in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. This projected casualty rate is exceptionally high for a modern military operation, especially one against a smaller adversary, indicating a profound understanding of the defensive challenges and a willingness to accept unprecedented losses, which stands apart from typical contemporary strategic planning. This projected human cost has driven China's extensive preparation for an invasion that, based purely on numerical comparisons, should theoretically overwhelm Taiwan's military. Missiles have become central to China's strategy, though Beijing acknowledges Taiwan possesses adequate defenses to mitigate their impact. The naval blockade was considered even more critical, yet it presents two significant drawbacks. Firstly, any vessels deployed for the blockade cannot simultaneously participate in the invasion itself. Secondly, and more crucially, ships forming part of China's blockade become highly vulnerable targets. It is at this juncture that the strategic landscape begins to change, and the blueprint established by Ukraine against Russia becomes particularly relevant. If a naval blockade constitutes China's strategy, then Ukraine can furnish Taiwan with the precise means to overcome such a blockade, despite Taiwan's significantly smaller size. The evidence for this lies in the Black Sea. China's aspirations for the Taiwan Strait and its surrounding waters mirror Russia's intentions for the Black Sea. Leveraging its formidable warships, Russia aimed to transform the Black Sea into a perilous zone for Ukraine's cargo vessels, while simultaneously establishing a secure conduit for funneling troops and equipment into the Ukrainian mainland by way of Crimea and Russia itself. However, the Black Sea is now virtually devoid of the once renowned Russian fleet that bore its name. Ukraine's maritime and aerial drones are a primary factor in this transformation. These drones could represent the decisive advantage Taiwan needs to dismantle President Xi's plans. Ukraine's maritime drones have been a consistent presence in the Black Sea for years, again making headlines on May 3rd. Deployed against two Russian Shadow Fleet tankers in Novorossiysk, Ukraine's drones inflicted significant damage on vessels stationed in the port. Novorossiysk is now the primary anchorage for the Black Sea Fleet, following Ukraine's drone and missile attacks that forced its relocation from its traditional base in Sevastopol. This demonstrates Ukraine's continued defiance of Russian naval power, employing an asymmetric strategy that traditional warships are ill-equipped to counter. Over one-third of Russia's Black Sea fleet has been neutralized from the Ukraine conflict by drones and missiles. What was intended as an impenetrable blockade, executed by ships Ukraine was thought incapable of harming, has devolved into a humiliating Russian retreat, an outcome unforeseen when President Putin initiated his invasion. The blueprint mentioned earlier is evident here. Ukraine's achievements in the Black Sea are transferable to the Taiwan Strait and its adjacent waters. Russia has been practically defeated in the Black Sea, and while Russia's navy was always less robust than perceived, and certainly not as modern as China's, President Xi will undoubtedly have observed the fate of President Putin's warships. The lessons from the Black Sea have been absorbed. It doesn't matter how big or strong your warships might be. When you have to bring them closer to the enemy, and especially when they have to stay in one spot as part of a blockade, they become vulnerable to missiles and drones. By following the Ukrainian blueprint, Taiwan could use maritime and aerial drones to shatter China's blockade. Furthermore, Taiwan possesses a significantly stronger anti-ship missile capability than Ukraine. As reported by the Taipei Times on March 11th, Taiwan holds approximately 1,000 domestically developed Changfeng 2 and 3 anti-ship missiles, alongside 400 U.S.-made Harpoon missiles. The former are reportedly capable of devastating entire aircraft carriers. Taiwan recognizes that Ukraine's innovations could be pivotal in undermining China's plans. Ukraine shares this understanding. It is not coincidental that Ukraine is forging partnerships and connections across Asia, signaling to China that President Xi's ambitions may be thwarted. Taiwan and Ukraine have progressively strengthened their relationship since President Putin initiated his invasion, likely due to Taiwan perceiving significant parallels between President Putin's actions and President Xi's intentions. As early as November 2023, Taiwan began signing memorandums of understanding with Ukraine while attending a conference focused on Ukraine's reconstruction efforts. Taiwan has consistently provided humanitarian aid to Ukraine throughout much of the invasion, and this nascent relationship has intensified since the signing of 6 MOUs in Poland in 2023. 2 years later, Taiwan formalized another agreement with Ukraine, this time to establish a medical program offering doctor training, medical equipment, and other forms of support. Taiwan has refrained from providing direct military aid to Ukraine, likely to avoid escalating tensions in the Indo-Pacific region. However, what began as a humanitarian relationship appears poised for evolution. On January 27th, the Indo-Pacific Defense Forum reported that Taiwan is now exploring a partnership with Ukraine to enhance its drone capabilities. Such a development would formalize collaborations already emerging through unofficial channels, according to the forum. It would also likely bolster existing initiatives in Taiwan, such as the 5-year drone development program launched by Taiwan in 2025. The relationship between Taiwan and Ukraine is demonstrably strengthening, and to President Xi's reported displeasure, it is evident that Taiwan acknowledges Ukraine's role in creating a blueprint for repelling a Chinese naval invasion. Other nations within the Indo-Pacific region have been closely observing Ukraine's actions against Russia and are similarly adopting drone tactics. Thailand, for instance, has reportedly employed Ukraine-style drone strikes against Cambodian forces, as detailed by The Telegraph. At the 2026 Defense Services Asia exhibition in Malaysia, drones were a central focus. The exhibition highlighted a substantial demand across Asia for the types of weaponry Ukraine has been deploying. Even beyond the Indo-Pacific, extending into the Gulf region, indications suggest future collaborations between Ukraine and Taiwan. Ukraine has entered into decade-long defense agreements with several Gulf nations affected by the conflict between the United States and Iran, with drones forming a core component of these agreements. President Putin is reportedly displeased by Ukraine's growing influence in Asia. However, President Xi is likely to be even more incensed. He is witnessing decades of investment aimed at establishing China as a dominant military power, potentially undermined as drones emerge as the preferred weaponry for the very nations China seeks to intimidate. President Xi has observed Taiwan meticulously cultivating its partnership with a receptive Ukraine, and he now understands that any immediate invasion attempt would likely result in Ukraine providing drones and specialized expertise to Taiwan. This mirrors Ukraine's activities in the Gulf. The very existence of these developments demonstrates to President Xi that he cannot even rely on President Putin and his forces to divert Ukraine from forging such relationships. China's objective was to isolate Taiwan. Ukraine appears poised to prevent that outcome. President Xi's original intention was to leverage the situation in Ukraine as both a strategic diversion and a potential training ground for Chinese soldiers. While global attention remained fixed on Ukraine, China's ambitions regarding Taiwan could proceed unobserved. The United States' launch of Operation Epic Fury against Iran provided another such distraction. The U.S., after all, is among the nations most likely to intervene in Taiwan's defense should China invade. Despite often issuing contradictory statements, U.S. President Donald Trump has asserted that Taiwan will remain secure for the duration of his presidency. Any diversion, such as the one in Iran, is therefore beneficial to President Xi. China has even reportedly deployed approximately 200 soldiers to Ukraine, as reported by The Hill in April 2025, ostensibly to glean lessons from frontline observations. The Ukraine conflict was intended to be instrumental in China's invasion of Taiwan. Now, that same conflict is providing the lessons and potentially soon the equipment that will allow Taiwan to defend itself. The reality President Xi has been compelled to accept is straightforward. China fears the potential impact of drones on its ships should it attempt an invasion of Taiwan. Even without formal cooperation on drone production between Ukraine and Taiwan, this apprehension is evident, as President Xi understands that Ukraine has provided the essential blueprint for Taiwan's defense. We are also observing evidence that the entire strategic calculation for China's Taiwan invasion has changed. The previous widespread belief that China planned to invade Taiwan in 2027 no longer appears to hold true. Sky News reports that U.S. intelligence agencies now believe China is no longer planning a 2027 invasion, instead seeking to gain control over the island through non-military means. This strategic pivot from military invasion to non-kinetic control is a profound departure from historical precedents for territorial claims, indicating a significant re-evaluation of risk and reward in the face of evolving defensive capabilities, particularly those demonstrated by Ukraine. This represents a complete strategic reversal, and it is not coincidental. Small, cost-effective aerial drones, particularly those with sufficient range to counter novel Chinese concepts such as mobile piers designed to aid an invasion of Taiwan, would prove lethal to China. The maritime drones that have been responsible for sinking Russian vessels in the Black Sea could pose an equally significant threat to Chinese warships, whether those are vessels that are trying to enforce a blockade or ships attempting to navigate the Taiwan Strait for an amphibious landing. And though you might argue that China has more naval capabilities to deploy against Taiwan than Russia has within the Black Sea, and you'd be correct, China also lacks the ability to move troops into Taiwan by land, unlike Russia and Ukraine. Its options are limited to amphibious and aerial landings. Ukraine's drone-focused blueprint is specifically designed to counter both. It is not solely Ukraine and Taiwan that will be a source of concern for President Xi. In India, there are indications of Ukraine's growing influence as well. Although India, much like China, has benefited from reduced Russian oil prices resulting from sanctions, a shift in India's defense posture has also been observed since the Ukraine war began. A nation that once sourced 76% of its weapons imports from Russia between 2009 and 2013 has progressively reduced these purchases, with Russian weapons accounting for only 36% of imports between 2019 and 2023. One of the nations potentially replacing Russia as a weapons provider to India is Ukraine. On January 29th, it was revealed that India had acquired VBAT drones, combat-tested in Ukraine, signaling that one of China's primary rivals for Asian dominance is also beginning to absorb lessons from the nation that has provided such a powerful blueprint to Taiwan. This presents a problem for China. If India begins to support Ukraine and vice versa, China will face a significantly more challenging target to influence. The same, as explained, applies to Taiwan and the broader Indo-Pacific region. After decades spent catching up to the world's largest militaries, to the point of becoming a leading power player in the Indo-Pacific, China is now compelled to reevaluate every plan it had for asserting its military dominance. And there is now a possibility, however remote, that China might even decide to abandon its plans for Taiwan entirely and instead focus on another nation that possesses territory to which China lays claim. That nation is Russia. President Putin may soon discover that the true ultimate consequence of his Ukraine invasion is that he becomes the final casualty in a series of geopolitical events he never anticipated. His invasion inadvertently strengthened Ukraine. Ukraine's development of its drone-based defense has inspired other smaller nations, such as Taiwan. China now confronts significant challenges in the Indo-Pacific due to the fundamental shift in our understanding of modern warfare. This shift could potentially lead to China redirecting its attention northward, towards Russian territories where a substantial portion of the population already speaks Chinese. Could it be that President Xi and President Putin are on a collision course? This would represent a turn of events that seemed almost inconceivable just a few years ago, when Taiwan appeared to be China's singular focus. However, we may already be witnessing the initial stages of China's encroachment into Russia. President Xi has been exploiting President Putin's escalating desperation for some time. Russian territory is already, in essence, becoming Chinese, and it may not be long before President Xi abandons Taiwan and instead addresses a weakened Russia. President Putin may be powerless to prevent this.